People with childhood trauma. Tell your story.
I remember my childhood as a time filled with tears I could not explain. I often cried, sometimes because I felt lonely, sometimes because I was overwhelmed, sometimes simply because emotions were too big for me to carry. But whenever I cried, my parents would say, "Don't exaggerate, it's nothing." Their words were meant to calm me, perhaps even to toughen me, but to me they felt like dismissal. Each time I heard those phrases, I learned to silence myself. I learned that my feelings were not important, that they were small things, that they did not deserve attention. I began to hide my emotions, to swallow them, to pretend I was fine even when I was not. As I grew older, this silence became part of me. I stopped asking for comfort. I stopped admitting when I was hurt. I stopped believing that anyone could understand me. My tears dried on the outside, but inside they remained, locked away in a place I never dared to open. I remember sitting in my room, clutching a pillow, wanting to cry but holding it back because I knew someone would tell me again that I was exaggerating. I remember walking into the kitchen, trying to speak, but swallowing my words because I feared they would sound foolish. I remember the quiet ache of wanting to be heard but never daring to ask. Now, as an adult, I see the consequences. I do not know how to speak about my feelings. I struggle to find words for sadness, for fear, even for joy. I am afraid to ask for help, afraid that someone will tell me again that I am exaggerating, that it is nothing, that I should be stronger. There are moments when I feel the weight of this silence pressing down on me. In conversations, I hesitate. In relationships, I withdraw. In times of struggle, I carry the burden alone. And yet, deep inside, I long for connection, for understanding, for the freedom to say, "This is how I feel." I realize now that my parents did not mean to harm me. They thought they were teaching me resilience. But resilience without expression becomes isolation. Strength without vulnerability becomes emptiness. And silence, carried too long, becomes a prison. I am learning slowly to break that silence, to write about my feelings, to share them in small ways, to remind myself that emotions are not small things. They are part of being human. They deserve space. They deserve words. They deserve compassion. It is not easy. Each time I try to open up, I feel fear. But I also feel hope. Hope that one day I will no longer be afraid to ask for help. Hope that one day I will speak freely about what I carry inside. Hope that one day I will believe that my feelings matter. I remember the first time I admitted to a friend that I was struggling. My voice shook, my hands trembled, but instead of dismissal, I received understanding. That moment felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. It was small, but it was proof that my emotions were real, that they deserved to be seen. And when I look back at that child who cried and was told to stop, I want to tell him, your tears were not exaggeration. They were real. They were valid. And you deserve to be heard.
I grew up in a house where comparisons were constant. The words I heard most often were, "Look at your sister, she's better." They were said casually, sometimes with a smile, sometimes with disappointment, but always with the same effect. They cut into me. At first, I tried to fight against them. I studied harder, I practiced longer, I tried to be perfect. I thought that if I achieved enough, if I proved myself, I would finally hear, "We're proud of you." But no matter what I did, it was never enough. If I brought home good grades, they said, "Your sister did even better." If I tried something new, they asked, "Why can't you be more like her?" Slowly, I began to believe that I was always second best, always lacking, always less. I remember sitting at the dinner table, listening to praise directed at her, while my own efforts were brushed aside. I remember standing in front of the mirror, wondering what was wrong with me, why I could never measure up. I remember the quiet ache of wanting to be seen, but feeling invisible. As I grew older, this belief followed me everywhere. In school, I hesitated to raise my hand, afraid my answer would not be good enough. In friendships, I feared being a burden, convinced that others deserved better company. In love, I doubted myself, wondering if anyone could truly choose me when there were always better people out there. Now, as an adult, I carry this shadow into my successes. Even when I achieve something significant, a promotion, a project completed, recognition from others, I feel a quiet voice inside whispering, "It's not enough. You're not enough." I smile, I celebrate, but deep down, I question whether I deserve it. There are moments when I stand in front of a crowd, presenting my work, and I hear the old refrain, "Look at your sister, she's better." It is no longer spoken aloud, but it lives inside me, shaping the way I see myself. I realize now that those words were not truth. They were a lens placed over my childhood, distorting my vision of myself. My worth was never less. My achievements were never meaningless. But growing up in constant comparison taught me to measure myself against others instead of seeing my own value. I am learning slowly to break free from that shadow, to remind myself that success is not a competition, to celebrate my own path, my own victories, my own growth. To believe that being enough is not about being better than someone else, but about being true to myself. It is not easy. Each time I reach a milestone, I fight the instinct to dismiss it. Each time I receive praise, I resist the urge to deflect. But with each step, I grow stronger. I begin to see myself not as less than, but as whole, capable, worthy. I remember the first time I allowed myself to feel proud without comparison. It was a small achievement, something ordinary, but I looked at it and thought, this is mine, this is enough. That moment felt like freedom. And when I look back at that child who heard those comparisons, I want to tell her, you were never less. You were always enough. Your value was never measured by your sister's achievements. It was always yours, waiting for you to see it.
I grew up in a house where absence was the rule. My father worked endlessly, leaving before sunrise and returning long after dark, his face lined with exhaustion, his words few and heavy. My mother was always busy, moving from one task to another, her hands full, her mind elsewhere. And so, I grew up alone. As a child, I would sit by the window, watching other children play with their parents in the yard, hearing their laughter echo across the street. I longed for that warmth, that attention, that simple presence. But in my own home, there was only silence. I learned to play alone, to eat alone, to fall asleep alone. I learned that my feelings had no audience, that my needs had no place. I remember evenings when I tried to tell my mother about something that had happened at school. A drawing I had made, a small victory in class. But her eyes were already elsewhere, her hands busy, her mind distracted. I remember waiting for my father, hoping for a moment of connection, but receiving only a tired nod before he disappeared into sleep. That loneliness became a part of me. It shaped the way I saw myself, the way I saw others, the way I saw love. I grew up believing that people leave, that attention fades, that presence is temporary. Now, as an adult, I feel the weight of those years. In relationships, I fear abandonment. Even when someone loves me, even when they stay, I carry the quiet terror that one day they will walk away. I struggle to trust, to believe that love can be steady, that presence can be permanent. There are moments when I look at my partner and wonder, how long until they realize I am not enough? How long until they leave? I hide these fears, afraid to speak them, afraid that naming them will make them real. I know that this fear is not about the present, but about the past. It is the echo of a childhood spent alone, the echo of rooms filled with silence, the echo of a boy who wanted to be seen but was invisible. And yet, I am learning. Slowly, I begin to understand that love is not the same as absence, that presence can be real, that connection can be lasting. I begin to speak cautiously about my fears. I begin to trust, step by step, that I will not always be left behind. I remember the first time I admitted to my partner, "I'm afraid you'll leave me." My voice trembled, my heart raced, but instead of rejection, I received reassurance. That moment felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. It was proof that love could stay, that presence could be real. I also remember the first time I allowed myself to believe that someone's embrace would not vanish. It was a quiet evening, nothing extraordinary. But as I sat beside them, I realized I was not alone anymore. That realization was both terrifying and liberating. And when I look back, I want to tell that boy I once was, you were never unworthy. You were never meant to be alone. One day, you will find people who stay. One day, you will learn that love does not leave.
I remember the words that shaped my childhood. They were not words of encouragement, not words of hope, but sharp reminders of doubt. You will never achieve anything. They were spoken so often that they became part of me, echoing in my mind even when no one was around. As a child, I tried to fight against them. I wanted to prove that I was capable, that I could succeed, that I was more than their doubts. I stayed up late working on school projects, hoping someone would notice. I practiced harder, studied longer, tried to be perfect, but each time I showed effort, each time I reached for something, the refrain returned. It doesn't matter, you won't achieve anything anyway. I remember sitting at my desk, staring at my notebooks filled with ideas, wanting to share them, wanting someone to say they mattered. But instead, I heard laughter or silence. I remember presenting a project at school, proud of what I had done, only to come home and hear indifference. Those words became chains, binding me, shaping the way I saw myself. As I grew older, I carried those chains with me. They became the reason I pushed myself harder than anyone else. I worked beyond my limits, driven by the need to prove, to others, but most of all to myself, that I was capable, that I was worthy, that I could achieve. Each task became a battle, each success a victory against the voices of my past. I remember the first time I completed a major project at work. My colleagues praised me, my manager congratulated me, but inside I felt both pride and fear. Pride that I had succeeded, fear that it was still not enough. I stayed late, worked longer, pushed further, convinced that only relentless effort could silence the echo of those childhood words. There are nights when I collapse into bed, exhausted, my body aching, my mind racing. I wonder if I am chasing approval that will never come, if I am fighting ghosts that no longer exist. But then I remember the child who was told she would never achieve anything, and I know I cannot stop. I owe it to that child to prove otherwise. I realize now that my worth was never defined by those voices. My achievements are not measured by their doubts. My strength lies not in perfection, but in persistence. I am learning, slowly, to celebrate my victories, to rest without guilt, to believe that I am enough even without proving it to anyone. I remember the first time I allowed myself to feel proud without comparison. It was a small achievement, something ordinary, but I looked at it and thought, this is mine. This is enough. That moment felt like freedom. And when I look back, I want to tell that child, you were lied to. You are capable. You are strong. You will achieve more than they ever imagined. And you do not need to exhaust yourself to prove it. Your worth has always been yours.
I remember the afternoons when I came home from school, clutching my drawings like treasures. I had poured myself into them. Colors that carried my emotions. Lines that told my stories. Shapes that felt like pieces of me. I was walking to the kitchen, my heart racing, hoping my mother would look at them, hoping she would smile, hoping she would say, "This is beautiful." But she never did. Her eyes were always elsewhere, her hands busy, her mind distracted. My drawings ended up on the table, untouched, forgotten, as if they were nothing more than scraps of paper. I stood there, waiting for her gaze, waiting for her words, but they never came. That silence hurt more than any harsh word. It taught me that what I created did not matter, that my voice was too small, that my talents were invisible. I began to hide my drawings, to keep them in notebooks, to sketch quietly in my room where no one could see. I told myself it was safer to keep them hidden, safer to pretend they didn't exist, safer to avoid the disappointment of indifference. I remember nights when I sat alone, sketching by the dim light of a lamp, pouring my feelings into lines and colors, but never daring to show them. I imagined what it would feel like to be seen, to be valued, to hear someone say, "This matters." But imagination was all I had. At school, I sometimes showed my work to classmates. Some smiled, some shrugged, some laughed. Even when they liked it, I couldn't believe them. I thought they were just being polite, that their words were empty. My mother's silence had already taught me that praise was unreliable, that attention was fleeting. As I grew older, I carried that fear with me. I am afraid to show my talents, afraid to reveal what I create, afraid that no one will care. Even when I finish something I am proud of, a project, a piece of art, a success at work, I hesitate. I hear the old echo, "It doesn't matter. No one is interested." There are moments when I want to share, when I want to step forward and say, "This is mine. This is what I can do." But the fear stops me. I imagine the blank stare, the distracted glance, the silence that once greeted my childhood drawings. I know that this fear is not about the present, but about the past. It is the echo of a child who wanted to be seen, but was invisible. It is the shadow of a boy who carried his drawings home, only to watch them disappear into nothing. And yet I am learning. Slowly, I begin to understand that my talents are not defined by whether others notice them. They have value because they are mine, because they carry my voice, my story, my truth. I begin to share, cautiously, with people I trust. I begin to believe that someone might care, that someone might see. I remember the first time I showed a piece of my work to a friend. My hands trembled, my heart raced. But instead of indifference, I received admiration. That moment felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. It was proof that my creations mattered, that they could touch someone else. I also remember the first time I allowed myself to feel proud without waiting for approval. It was a small sketch, nothing extraordinary, but I looked at it and thought, this is mine. This is enough. That moment felt like freedom. Now, I try to remind myself that my worth is not measured by silence, not measured by indifference, not measured by whether someone else notices. My worth is in the act of creating, in the courage to share, in the persistence to keep going even when fear whispers otherwise. And when I look back, I want to tell that boy, your drawings were never meaningless. They were pieces of you, and you deserve to be seen. One day, you will find people who care. One day, you will learn that your talents are worth sharing.
Sometimes I felt like a shadow in my own family. My older siblings shone with achievements, my younger one drew all the tenderness, and I was left somewhere in the middle, unnoticed. It wasn't that anyone was cruel to me. It was the quiet absence of recognition, the silence that made me believe I didn't matter. I remember evenings at the dinner table when conversations flowed around me. My older sibling spoke of accomplishments. My younger sibling demanded attention, and I sat quietly, waiting for a moment to speak. Sometimes I tried to add my thoughts, but my words slipped past unheard. Other times I lowered my voice before it even left my lips, convinced that no one would care. At school, I carried the same silence. I raised my hand in class, then lowered it again, afraid that my answer would be dismissed. I wrote essays filled with ideas, but I doubted their worth. I learned to swallow my feelings, to keep my thoughts hidden, to blend in. I became the quiet one, the one who did not disturb, the one who did not demand. As a child, I longed for recognition, for someone to say, I see you, I hear you, you matter. But those words never came. Instead, I learned to silence myself, to disappear into the shadows. Now, as an adult, I carry that silence with me. In conversations, I hesitate. Even when I have something important to say, I hold back. I fear that my opinion has no weight, that my words will be brushed aside, that my voice will vanish into the air. I often choose silence, even when my heart is screaming to speak. There are moments when I sit in meetings, ideas burning inside me, but I stay quiet. I imagine the dismissive glance, the indifferent nod, the subtle reminder that my thoughts are not needed. I tell myself it is safer to remain silent, safer to avoid the sting of being ignored. I know that this fear is not about the present, but about the past. It is the echo of a child who felt invisible, the echo of a middle child who grew up believing her voice did not matter. And yet, I am learning. Slowly, I begin to understand that my words have value, that my thoughts deserve space, that my voice is worth hearing. I begin to speak, cautiously, in small moments. I begin to trust that someone might listen, that someone might care. I remember the first time I shared my opinion in a group, and someone nodded, someone agreed, someone said, "That's a good point." My heart raced, my hands trembled, but inside, I felt a spark of recognition. It was proof that my voice mattered, that my silence was not the only option. I also remember the first time I allowed myself to speak without fear, without hesitation, without apology. It was a simple conversation, nothing extraordinary, but I spoke and I was heard. That moment felt like freedom. Now, I try to remind myself that being the middle child does not mean being invisible. My worth is not measured by how loudly I speak, but by the truth I carry. My silence is no longer a prison. It is a choice I can break. And when I look back, I want to tell that girl, you were never invisible. You were always worthy. Your voice matters. And one day you will learn to speak it without fear.